The silence in the house wasn't just an absence of noise. It felt like a physical weight the moment after Elena's taxi turned the corner. Elias stood on the porch, watching the taillights fade into the evening mist, a heavy knot tightening in his chest. She was gone for a year, a fellowship in the city that she couldn't turn down, and he was left behind to mind the life they had built together. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments. Where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? He tried to distract himself that first evening. He scrubbed countertops that were already clean and reorganized bookshelves that didn't need organizing. But the quiet followed him like a shadow. Elena had promised to call daily, and she did, but her voice through the speaker was a poor substitute for her presence across the dinner table. The routine set in quickly. Work, a silent drive home, a meal for one, and a restless sleep in a bed that felt too large. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the pattern broke. Elias was staring blankly at the rain streaking the living room window when a hesitant knock echoed through the hallway. When he opened the door, he found Margaret, Elena's mother, standing there, clutching a Tupperware container and looking unsure of herself. She offered a fragile smile, explaining that she had made too much stew and couldn't bear the thought of him eating alone. Elias, grateful for any disruption to the solitude, invited her in. They sat in the kitchen, the steam from the stew fogging the windows, and talked about Elena. They spoke of her bravery, her ambition, and how strange the town felt without her vibrant energy. Margaret looked around the kitchen and sighed, admitting that her own home felt terribly quiet, too. Elias nodded, unable to find the right words, but feeling a kinship in their shared void. That visit sparked a rhythm. Margaret began stopping by a few times a week, bringing fresh bread, garden vegetables, or just a reason to put the kettle on. What started as polite small talk about the weather and local news slowly deepened. Margaret shared stories of Elena's childhood, how she used to climb the old oak tree in the backyard to read in peace. Elias listened, smiling on the outside, but feeling a complex ache on the inside. One evening, a relentless autumn storm battered the roof. Margaret stayed later than usual, the drumming rain creating a cocoon around them. Elias noticed for the first time how weary she looked. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her tea, and she confessed that she stayed awake most nights, worrying about her daughter navigating a massive city alone. Elias admitted he did the same. In that moment of vulnerability, the house didn't feel cold anymore. It felt warm, illuminated by a shared understanding. Yet, a subtle shift began to occur, a feeling Elias wasn't prepared for. It wasn't romance, certainly not in the traditional sense, but it was a comfort that bordered on dependency. He found himself checking the clock, waiting for the sound of her car in the driveway. On days she didn't come, the silence returned with a vengeance, sharper than before. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself she was just a proxy for Elena, a reminder of the woman he loved. But as they sat across from each other, the air between them grew thick, as if the silence was pulling them into a shared orbit. Then came the comment that hung in the air. During a quiet dinner, Margaret looked up and said, "Loneliness has a way of tricking the heart, doesn't it? It makes us seek warmth wherever we can find it." Elias didn't reply immediately. He stood to clear the table, his pulse quickening. When she left that night, he leaned against the closed door, his mind racing. The house felt different, charged with questions he was afraid to ask. He went to bed thinking of Elena, but also of the strange, soothing presence of her mother. He wondered if this new closeness was a lifeline or a trap. Weeks drifted by, and the dynamic intensified. The conversations became less about Elena and more about them, Elias's frustrations at work, Margaret's regrets about her past, the loneliness of aging. It was a seductive comfort. They were two lonely people huddled against the cold, and the lines of propriety began to blur, not in action, but in emotion. The turning point arrived on a night when the power grid failed. The storm outside was fierce, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. Elias lit a series of candles, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Margaret sat on the sofa, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "Sometimes," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the rain, "I feel like I've already lost her to the world. And I don't know who I am without her." Elias sat across from her, feeling the gravity of her words. They spoke then with raw honesty, about fear, about the crushing weight of solitude, about the need to be seen. They laughed softly at old memories, and then silence fell, a heavy, pregnant silence. Elias looked at her and saw not just his mother-in-law, but a woman who was hurting. The instinct to comfort her, to bridge the physical gap between them, was powerful. "You don't have to carry it all alone," she said softly, looking directly at him. The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire. Elias felt a mix of relief and alarm. He wanted to lean into that comfort, but the image of Elena, trusting him, thousands of miles away, flashed in his mind. This closeness, though born of innocent intent, was venturing into dangerous territory. He stood up abruptly, breaking the spell. "I should check the breaker box," he lied, his voice tight. "And maybe I should call Elena tonight, even if it's late." Margaret looked at him, and he saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She nodded slowly, not with offense, but with a sad, dignified understanding. "Yes," she said, "you should call her." After she left, driving away into the rain, Elias sat in the dark living room watching the candles burn down. He realized how easily the heart could be confused, how emotional intimacy could mimic something else entirely. He knew he had to protect his marriage and the trust Elena had placed in him. The following weeks required a deliberate recalibration. Margaret continued to visit, but Elias kept the internal door guarded. He busied himself with tasks, fixing the porch, gardening, and pouring his emotions into long, detailed letters to Elena. Margaret seemed to understand the silent boundary that had been erected. She still brought food, they still talked, but the electric charge was gone. The atmosphere became lighter, cleansed of the confusing intensity. Elias realized that the stormy night had been a necessary precipice. He had looked over the edge and chosen to step back. It wasn't about pushing Margaret away, it was about defining the nature of their support. During one visit, Margaret paused by the door and said, "We just needed to know we weren't invisible, Elias." That's all it was. "I know," Elias replied with a genuine smile. "And we aren't." They had found a balance. The relationship shifted from a crutch to a pillar, strong, separate, and supportive. Elias focused on his own resilience, finding peace in his solitude rather than fearing it. When he spoke to Elena on the phone, he was more present, more open about his struggles, bridging the distance with honesty rather than filling the void with someone else. When Elena finally returned for a mid-year break, the change in the house was undeniable. It didn't feel empty or tense, it felt settled. She hugged Elias, then hugged her mother, looking between them with a bright smile. "You two seem good," Elena noted, sensing the peace. "I was worried you'd both be miserable without me." "We managed," Elias said, exchanging a brief, knowing look with Margaret. "We kept each other steady." The three of them spent the next few days in a comfortable rhythm. Elias watched Margaret and Elena laughing in the kitchen and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He admired Margaret for her grace and her ability to step back. He respected himself for recognizing the line before crossing it. The lesson had been learned. Emotional connection is a complex landscape, especially when loneliness acts as the guide. But by acknowledging the feelings and choosing honor over comfort, they had saved the foundation of their family. As the months continued and Elias waited for Elena's permanent return, the house remained a sanctuary. The visits from Margaret continued, but they were defined by clarity and respect. The confusing shadows of that stormy night had vanished, replaced by the steady light of a family that understood the value of boundaries. Elias woke up one morning to a text from Elena, "Coming home for good in 2 weeks. Can't wait." He smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He thought about the journey of the past year, the loneliness, the temptation of comfort, and the strength it took to do the right thing. He realized that love isn't just about holding on. It's about knowing how to stand alone without breaking so you can be whole for the person who returns. The house was no longer a quiet echo chamber. It was a space prepared for the future, built on trust, tested by silence, and reinforced by the wisdom of knowing when to draw the line. And as Elias looked out at the street, he knew they had all come through the quiet crossing stronger than before.